Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, I think producing wise, yes, today was great. I had everything written and edited before the fight even started, but like apparently Ovis crashed in the middle of my A block. And right, right, correct. Yeah, my workflow is great today. Exactly. All right, well, thank you so much, Eric, for chatting with me. I'll let you get back to your evening. All right, talk to you tomorrow. Bye.
Got quiet all of a second.
Hello.
Hi, Ann.
Hi.
We've got 11 people so far.
All right. Let's see. We still have about a minute till 7.
Yeah,
We have
so
40 minutes on here.
yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe I should just start. Let people join in when they get on.
Yeah, I want to give a message at the end then too. So okay. Do you know how to take over the screen or?
I think if I hit the share screen here, let's see what happens if I hit that. You cannot start a screen share while other participant is sharing.
Huh? Oh, okay. So maybe I should just unshare. Okay, I'll stop sharing mine and then.
Okay.
Okay, I see you.
All right. All right. Can you see the lecture?
Yes.
All right. Well, it is 7 o'clock. So I guess I'll start in on this.
Okay, Jeff.
Since there's only 11 of us, I guess if anyone has a question, just chime in. So.
If you need to unmute yourselves, do that too.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming to this first of its kind lecture, I guess, that we've done. And I'm going to talk a little bit about woodland plants and woodland gardening. And might be a little, I'm used to doing about an hour with questions, but we'll try to get through this as quick as I can and still have time for some questions. All right, so I've divided up the lecture into 2 parts. A sort of a bright shade or a part shade section. These would be thin woodlands, young woodlands, openings or gaps. It could be a south or western facing slope where the sun can come through the woods a little bit stronger in the afternoon. Roughly 4 to 6 hours of filtered afternoon sun is what I'm talking about. And then the second part will be full shade. And these will be more like cove plants that are getting all day shade or perhaps at most morning sun. Okay, so for the filtered shade, a lot of these plants can actually be in full sun. They tolerate part shade, and some of them will actually go into full shade as well. And Aconitum uncinnatum is one of those. It can be in full sun. I've seen people plant it in full sun. I think it gets a little burned when it's in that situation, but part shade to full shade on this plant. Tends to be kind of slightly vining, so you need to provide something for it to grow onto. Whoops, I didn't change the name on this one. They showed me I was a little bit rushed putting this together, I guess, and I forgot the caption name on that. Well, that should say Agastache scrofularia folia. In fact, I'm going to just alter that real quick right now so you can see. Can't usually do that during a lecture. Okay. The giant blue hyssop. One of the nice things about this plant, it is so large. It's a very big plant, and even though it's in the mint family, it doesn't have runners. It doesn't spread very rapidly. It can get up to 6 feet tall, sometimes taller, tends to be blue to kind of a pale pink in color, and very adaptable, full sun to light shade. Because it is in the mint family, it actually does not have any trouble with deer. And all kinds of great pollinators are attracted to it. And goldfinches seem attracted to it in the autumn. They like to, I don't know if they're picking at insects or if they're getting the seeds out of the plant, but the goldfinches really seem to like that plant. Antenarias. I love antenarias. There's a lot of different kinds of pussy toes. Most of them are full shade. There's a couple of full sun species. And to me, there's nothing nicer in a lawn than having a lawn full of pussy toes, and maybe if you're lucky, some of these bluets, the Hediotis cerulea. That's this plant right here, the Quaker ladies. Whoops, didn't advance that just yet. One thing about pussy toes is that they are dioecious. So all these sort of brown colored flowers here, those are the female plants, I believe. They're the female plants. And then all these taller ones in here, all these silver colored taller ones, they're the male. I could actually have that the other way around. I can't remember which is which. Ecologia canadensis, the eastern red columbine. This is the only native columbine to the east. And this is its preferred habitat is rocks and cliffs and rocky ground. Works really well in a garden that's on the dry side. Can fade away over time, but does really well if you give it very bad, poor rocky soil. Okay. We have a couple of milkweeds for shade. Pardon me. So this is Asclepias exaltata, the poke milkweed. This is a good 5-6 foot tall milkweed. Grows in bright shade. Can be in a fair amount of shade actually, but blooms a lot better if it's in more of a part shade situation. The leaves come in groups of 4 leaves. And they've got these great pink to white flowers that are very open clusters. It does spread somewhat underground through roots, but it's not too aggressive. One of the other ones that you'll run across occasionally is the 4-leaf milkweed, Asclepias quadrifolia. And this is a diminutive little milkweed. It grows in very dry soil. I don't know if you can see it here, but that soil down there, you see all those chinks down there? This is basically gravel with a little bit of soil washed into it. That's what it kind of likes to grow in. Often very dry, ridgy soil. I have occasionally seen it in a lot of sun, but typically in sort of bright shade, usually acidic. White to pink flowers. Very hard to see later in the season once the flowers are done blooming and you're looking for the pods. Very hard to pick out against the backdrop of all the other vegetation. Blophilia ciliata, the downy woodman. This is a great ground cover plant. Very similar to a little miniature bee balm. They always seem to be associated with these little beetles that like to get in the flowers, these little metallic beetles. I always see them in there. Also loves it very dry, tends to grow in very dry, gravelly soil. I had to throw some shrubs in here as well. I'm going to talk a lot about herbaceous plants, but I'll throw a few shrubs in there as well, some of my favorite ones. In sweet shrub, Calycanthus floris, very useful shrub. It's a great big massing shrub, good for a woodland screen. The deer don't seem to like it very much. And those flowers smell like overripe strawberries, maybe mixed with toner, ink toner. Sedges. Sedges are great woodland plants. They're becoming more and more popular in garden trade. Landscapers have used them for a number of years now. Oh, I'm getting a bad internet connection. morning here. Hopefully that isn't a problem. Everyone can hear me okay, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, good, good. So the nice thing about sedge is there are lots and lots of species available. They fit a variety of different habitat types. This is the Pennsylvania sedge. It makes a nice sort of false lawn. So this is it in the spring when it's in bloom. So what you're seeing there, all these little yellow tufts are the actual flowers in there. And then when it's done blooming in the summertime, it just kind of forms a nice grassy patch. Not something you would walk on, but pleasant to look at. Chesmanthium river oats is probably not a plant that needs an introduction. Many people would like to exclude it from their garden, actually. Can be a little bit over rambunctious, but has its uses. It's a good colonizer for difficult places, a good plant to use in a weedier area where you might want something to take over. Deer don't seem to bother it too much, and these seeds tend to be very attractive, and they hold well into the wintertime and make nice cut arrangements, actually. Chrysanthemum, the green and gold. That's a little Anemone canadensis right here, but the green and gold right here, it's a great ground cover plant, blooms for a really long time. It's one of the few native plants that can be in bloom almost all year long, all season long at least. And there are many cultivars of this, and there are several subspecies. The common one that we have around here growing wild, the one that you'll see growing at Wildwood Park and at Falls Ridge, is actually not a spreading type. It's really more a clumping, upright plant. Most of your ground cover varieties come out of a little further south and tend to be shorter. Great plant though. Coreopsis. So we have a few Coreopsis plants that will grow in a fair amount of shade, not really deep shade, but a nice amount of shade. Coreopsis major is one of them. That's the greater Coreopsis. And this grows in very, very dry wooded ridges, cliffs, and full sun in barren habitats, dry sort of places, but easily adaptable to any partly shady garden. Fills in, has runners, so it tends to fill in and form a nice patch. Its counterpart, the downy Coreopsis, Coreopsis pubescens, is similar, except that it prefers to grow in slightly wetter soils. You'll find this growing more in floodplains than up on the ridges, but has many similar characteristics. Decumaria barbara, the wood vamp. This is our native climbing hydrangea. So here it is climbing up this pole. These are the flowers. It's very fragrant, semi-evergreen, tends to be a little bit more southern, although I believe it does occur in Virginia somewhere. I'm not exactly sure where. It's one of those vines like poison ivy that have clinging roots, so that they will actually grow straight up a solid surface. They don't have to have a trellis or anything to grow on. Bottle brush grass, not to leave the grasses out. They can be very useful plants as well. If the Chesmanthium is a little bit much for you, then maybe try the bottle brush grass, Elymus districts. It's a beautiful summertime grass. It's got this sort of glaucous blue seed head to it. Looks like a field of wheat growing in the wood's edge. It's very attractive to my mind. White wood aster, the Eurybia divaricata, formerly Aster divaricata. Very common but very useful, a fall blooming plant for dry woods. Mixes really well with ferns. These are mixed in with hay-scented fern. One of the few plants that will grow well with hay-scented fern, actually. Wild geranium, geranium maculatum. This is a good wildflower for naturalizing. It spreads through seeds fairly rapidly and can form fairly considerable patches. Deer do tend to eat it, but it's one of those plants that they can eat pretty much all they want and not really do it too much harm because it grows so quickly. There's a few forms and selections of this as well. There's a white flowered one, and there's one that has purple leaves. But the good old ordinary wild type is the most robust one. Gentians. So gentians, most of them do tend to like to be in a little bit of shade. There are some for sun. Andrew's eye is the one I'm kind of using as a stand-in for bright shade. I usually see them in thin woods, usually in very good, rich soil, though. You can see that the bottle gentian is very, very slightly open there at the top. The other common species, closed gentian or Gentiana clausa, you wouldn't actually find that opening. It'll be tightly closed there at the tip. Sunflowers, I didn't put a specific species in because there are actually a lot of great woodland sunflowers or part shade sunflowers. Helianthus divaricatus, Helianthus microcephalus, Decapetalis, Stromosus. There's a lot of species of shade or semi-shade loving perennial sunflowers out there. They're typically fairly aggressive, so you want to give them plenty of room, a place to naturalize. It's a great plant for birds, a great plant for pollinating insects as well. Iris crustata, the crested iris. Here it is in a Catskill, New York garden that I planted years ago. It's a great ground cover iris and comes in many different forms, different flower colors. The roots spread above ground, so you don't want to put too much mulch on them. They'll tend to rot. They do often like to grow on a hillside where leaves will not accumulate on top of them. They're just starting to bloom now. They've got actually a fairly good sized flower for the size of the foliage. By comparison, this is the other little spring iris that we have around here, a little bit less common. Iris verna, the dwarf spring iris. This tends to grow in very, very dry, sandy, acidic soil. You can see here all the pine needles on the ground around this plant. The photo of this was taken on the edge of a pine hemlock forest up in the mountains. And the foliage is much more upright. It tends to be a clumping plant rather than a widely spreading plant. But otherwise pretty similar and can sometimes be hard to tell the difference between crested and the spring iris. Lilium canadensis, the Canada lily, typically in a little bit of shade. The red form is the most common one around here. Of course, if you go up into New England, they're all like a bright banana yellow. So, and then halfway in between, they tend to be orange. So it's a pretty variable plant. Not always the easiest to grow. You have to be pretty patient with them. Even more patient is the wood lily. This is a very difficult plant to grow, Lilium philadelphicum, but a great one if you can manage it. Loves it, very dry and acidic, and full sun to part shade. Here it is growing in a patch of ferns. Again, not the easiest to cultivate, but not completely impossible. And Lilium superbum, Turk's cap. This is probably the easiest of the three to grow. Grows to considerable size, up to 8, 9, even 10 feet tall, with the great reflexed petals. Attracts lots of swallowtail butterflies, which is the only insect that can pollinate lilies. Hummingbirds can do it too, but bees are just too small to effectively pollinate that plant. Lobelia syphilitica, the great blue lobelia, a nice, pretty easy adaptable plant, full sun, part shade. It likes it wet to medium. Again, pretty easy. It's more perennial than the red lobelia. Let's see, Lanister sempervirens, trumpet honeysuckle. I threw a few vines in here. You know, I had the decumaria earlier, so here's our native, one of our native vining honeysuckles. And most of them like to be right on the wood's edge. They tend to grow in shrubbery right on the edge of the forest. Lots of different varieties of this plant available. Usually they're selected for aphid resistance. Major Wheeler is a cultivar that's popular. Never actually seen this plant in the wild. I think you have to go out maybe towards Virginia Beach or Richmond even to see this plant in the wild. I don't think I ever have. Monardas, lots of different kinds of monardas out there, and both the clinopodia and the next one, the didyma, Monarda didyma, they both actually like a little bit of shade. They do a lot better. They're less prone to mildew if you give them a bit of shade. In fact, the white and the red are often found together, and they will naturally hybridize with one another and form very interesting color combinations. Picara aurea, the golden ground cell. This is a great all-purpose ground cover. When I was doing landscape design, I would use this in every design just about, because it could tolerate sun, it could tolerate shade, it could tolerate wet, it could tolerate dry. It's just a very good all-purpose plant. It would spread and form a nice semi-evergreen ground cover and had these great bright yellow flowers in the spring. Here it is growing along the bank of the pond that we made up in, this is just north of Yonkers in New York. Are we going to unlimited time now?
I don't know. That's what it says.
Okay. All right. Excuse me. Penstemons. There's a number of penstemons that like to grow in bright shade, but I just chose hirsutus as my favorite shade penstemon. Very easy to grow, likes it very dry. The photograph washes the color out a little bit. It tends to be a pale lavender to a very nice, strong lavender flower color. This boulder on the background should give you some idea as to kind of habitat it likes to grow in. Typically, it grows in very, very dry gravel, shaly banks, cliffs, and boulder fields. But it's pretty adaptable to a shade garden. It's only about a foot tall, too, so it fits in really nicely amongst other plants. Phlox paniculata. The common garden phlox is another plant that typically gets a lot of trouble with mildew, just like the Monarda didyma sometimes does. But it has a similar solution. It really likes a little bit of shade. The plant typically is found in kind of moist, shady ravines and floodplains in the wild. So you'll have a lot less trouble with mildew on summer phlox if you give them a little bright shade and some really decent soil. Jacob's ladder, Polemonium reptans. This is a nice little sky blue wildflower. Blooms about the same time, maybe a little later than Virginia bluebells, but prefers a little bit drier, a little bit sunnier location than Virginia bluebells. Pretty easy to grow, spreads rapidly by seed, but it will also spread somewhat less rapidly by underground running stems. It can form a fairly good sized patch. And there's a nice variegated form of that out on the nursery trade, I think called Heaven's Gate, or maybe it was called Jacob's Ladder or something. But that's pretty nice too. Porteranthus foliatus, Bowman's root. This is one that I often forget about because it's when it's not in bloom, it's kind of easy to miss. It's actually in the rose family, which makes it prone to deer browsing. Deer love to eat roses. But these flowers look sort of like almost like amelanchier or like Juneberry flowers. They're sort of wispy, like maybe slightly crumpled tissue paper. The stems you can see are reddish colored, and then the plant tends to have reddish seed pods in the autumn as well. So there's actually a pink flowered form of this, which has a cultivar name on it called, I think, Pink Panda for some reason. But it's a nice plant, very adaptable too. I've occasionally seen it in full sun. Primula media, the shooting star. I'm going with the new name on this. No longer Dodecatheon. Genetic testing is just, they've decided that these are actually related to primulas. Pretty well-known plant, I think. The typical forms around here are white. There are isolated pockets of pink ones. Here's some pink in a garden. But there are some pink ones, particularly if you go up near the Maryland border, the C&O Canal. Apparently they're all pink up there. Pythanthemum incanum, that's this plant here, below the Monarda didyma. Another great part shade mountain mint. It's very, very silver gray foliage. Likes it dry, and like a lot of the other mountain mints, attracts a lot of pollinators to it. It's pretty variable. I've seen a lot of different looking Incana plants out there. Some of them have a little bit of pink in the flower. Some have very broad leaves, some very narrow leaves. It seems to be a very variable genus. Well, rather, very variable species, rather. And rhododendrons. There are so many azaleas and rhododendrons out there. I just decided to throw them up here as a group and just say that native rhododendrons are great. If you can protect them from the deer, there is color and scent and form and foliage and all kinds of great things out there for them. These are some of my favorite ones. So this is Rhododendron paraclimenoides, great early spring blooming one, very fragrant. Above it here is Rhododendron arborescens, probably my favorite one for scent. It's extremely fragrant, and you can smell the fragrance on Rhododendron arborescens from a good half-mile away. And here, for a slightly more summer blooming one, or really late spring, but a great shocking color, the popular orange Rhododendron calendulaceum. And then below it, not native here, but a little bit further south, if you're looking for a real summer blooming native azalea, this is Rhododendron prunifolium, the plum leaf azalea, dark orange to red flowers in July. It's a great one for late blooming azaleas. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many different native azaleas out there. Skullcat. Sculia incana. The hoary skullcap, relatively tall plant, you know, in the 3 to 4 foot tall range. But again, it's in the mint family, and so deer tend not to touch it too much, and spreads pretty rapidly, both by underground runners and by seed. But it's got these great blue flowers. It looks great with mountain mint and bee balm. It's just a really good, useful filler plant for a difficult location. Silenus stellata, the starry catchfly. This is one of my favorite Silenes, the delicate white cut flower petals on it, like snowflakes. The stem is often ebony colored, black, and just very, very attractive. This sometimes hybridizes with fire pink, and you get an intermediate, kind of an unusual pink looking plant. I've actually made a deliberate hybrid cross on that plant before, and the result is a plant that kind of looks like a dianthus, but it's sterile. It does not, it does not actually produce seeds. Speaking of Silene virginica, there's the fire pink, everybody's favorite because it's bright red, and we don't have a whole lot of red flowers in our native plant vocabulary around here. Again, a very variable plant. Some bloom very early in the year, and some tend to bloom much later in the year. And some populations have very deep cut petals, as you can see here, and some have almost no cut in the petal at all. If anyone's ever curious why they call these pinks, it's because of that cut. It's called a pink. Whoops, I didn't mean to advance that. If you had pinking shears ever, that's what the cut on a pair of pinking shears would do. Okay, Spigelia. Here's another great bright red plant. The deer don't seem to bother it too much. Fairly adaptable shade plant. Great one for hummingbirds. Blooms for a long time. And in June, it blooms in June, which is a time of the year when there's not a whole lot else really in flower. It's a great bridge plant between the spring blooming flowers and the summer blooming flowers. Here I've got it growing with New Jersey tea. These two would not ordinarily be together, but they look nice in a garden together. So. Lots of variability in that plant too, actually. There are some that have, you see that the throat inside of the flower is yellow, but sometimes you can get ones that are green on the inside instead. And I know a fella down in Alabama who found one that was actually candy striped on the outside. A mix of white and red striping on the flowers. He swears that he'll give me one someday. Solidago bicolor, the silverrod. One thing about dry shade is that asters and goldenrods are really big players in the woods in those places. So don't forget your shade-loving goldenrods for dry woodland. They're really useful, very adaptable, and there are a lot of different species to choose from. Silverrod, unlike almost every other goldenrod, is white instead of yellow. Pretty adaptable. Actually, the picture here is in an open field. But this is in Maine, is where I took this picture. So up there, you can get away with growing shade plants in full sun because the summers are cooler. Here's another of our common shade goldenrods, the wreath goldenrod, Solidago acacia. It's called a wreath goldenrod because the flower stalks come in these long arching stems that bend. And I suppose if you wanted to, you could cut those and tie them up into a wreath. Zizia aptera, the heart-leafed golden Alexander. Golden Alexanders are another one of my favorite plants. We have 3 species of golden alexander around here, only 2 of which are really particularly common. They're the only 2 I've ever seen even. Zizia aptera, and the next one here, Zizia aurea. So aptera, you can see, is a smaller plant, and it has heart-shaped leaves to it. And Zizia aurea is a much bigger plant with lots of these sort of dissected leaves, both blooming at the same time, both occupying the same kinds of habitats. They are in the carrot family, and they're great for attracting black swallowtail butterflies. And they're just really, really useful ground cover plants for a difficult weed-prone area. In fact, the next picture I have here, you can see all that is Zizia aurea that I planted along this creek up in Pennsylvania. This was all planted by seed, just strewn seed in there. And that whole embankment used to be all garlic mustard and Japanese stiltgrass.
Nice.
And one of the nice things about Zizia is it comes up really early. And if you want to suppress stiltgrass, you need to have really heavy foliaged plants that come up really early. Okay, let's move on into the deep shade. See if there's enough time. About halfway. Good. Okay. Mature woodlands, ravines, coves, north-facing wooded slopes, possibly 4 to 6 hours of filtered morning sun at most, afternoon shade. Okay. Actea pachypoda, the doll's eyes. This is a great one. I really love doll's eyes. And they're so sort of unusual looking when they're in fruit. I didn't even bother showing a picture of it in flower because the flower is just a kind of a white tuft, kind of like the black cohosh, but smaller. And they call it doll's eyes because you got, of course, the white with a little black dot, just like a little eye. Very closely related, in fact, they've decided that it's no longer submissifuga, is Actea racemosa, the black cohosh. This is a pretty common plant around here. Very tall in flower. The foliage is actually pretty low. Very tall flower spikes topped with these spiky white flower clusters. Kind of smell kind of musty. Bugbane is another common name for this plant because it is supposed to repel bugs, or at least repels flies, although flies usually like stinky smelling things, so I'm not sure that it actually works. And here's another doll's eye. This is Actea rubra, the red doll's eyes. Now this actually doesn't grow in Virginia. It's more of a northern plant, but I like it so much that I figured I had to show it because it's such a cheerful plant. Unlike the other doll's eye, it doesn't actually have a little black pupil. You know, it's solidly red fruit. I just really, really like it. I'd love to be able to grow the plant. I believe you can find it in Pennsylvania. That's about as far south as it goes. Maidenhair fern, Adiantum pedatum, the maidenhair fern right here. You can see it. There's a little bit back here as well and over here. Great fine textured fern, a nice, not too aggressive spreading fern for a woodland. Great textural relief for a broadleaf plant like the wild ginger that's backing it here. The stems are ebony colored. And has kind of a nice fall color also. It tends to turn sort of a pinky yellow. There's just nothing I can say negative about maidenhair fern. I think it's great. Canada anemone, the anemone canadensis. This is a great aggressive ground cover. If you're looking for a ground cover replacement for a site where you're tearing out Pachysandra or something and you want this big monotypic patch or something, then Canon anemone is a good choice because it doesn't get too tall. It spreads incredibly rapidly and will grow just about anywhere. It grows in full sun, it grows in deep shade, it grows in wet places, it grows in dry places. It's really just a good all-purpose, all-around plant. Can be a bit much in small places. Don't mix it in with delicate little plants. It really is quite thuggish. So if you want it, you got to use it as it was intended. It is really a ground cover. Aurelia nudicollis, sarsaparilla. Here it is when it first comes up in the spring. It can be easily confused for poison ivy because it has that sort of shiny red leaf, and the leaflets come in 3, although there's 2 others here. But you can see that these leaflets all lead to a central point and then to a single stem down to what is really a tiny little woody stem at the base. Aralias are technically, you could almost consider them subshrubs because they do have a little bit of a woody projection above the ground. That goes for Aurelia racemosa as well. I love sarsaparilla. I think it's a great ground cover plant. Very interesting and unusual. Here it is later in the season in bloom. Those are the flowers. Not the most spectacular thing, but you know, I still like it a great deal. Here's the other one, the spikenard, Aurelia racemosa. Great, huge plant with gigantic leaves. This will eventually have a big white cluster of flowers right in the terminal of the stem. But most people don't plant this for the flower. The flower is kind of boring. When it produces fruit, then that's pretty attractive, but really it's a foliage plant. These great huge leaves with the black stem is what is really the most attractive part of this plant. Aruncus dioicus, the goat's beard. Goat's beard is a dioecious plant, so there are both separate male and female plants. The male tends to be blousier, so this is probably a picture of the male plant. And then once it's done blooming, these will dry up and fall off. The female plant will hold onto the flower stalks, and of course they'll form little fruit or seed capsules later in the season. Very large perennial, can be 4, 5, even 6 foot tall and about as broad. Deep shade, part shade, some people even throw them in full sun. It is in the rose family, so deer do tend to eat it if they get the chance. So just be aware of that. Wild ginger, Asarum canadense. Another great ground cover plant. A little bit better behaved than Canada anemone, although it does form extensive patches. But it's much shorter, much smaller plant, mixes really well with other woodland plants. Doesn't have the showiest of flower. It's just a little brown, nubby flower that's underneath the foliage in the spring. But a great foliage plant. Lady fern, Ethereum phyllis femina. Lady fern is one of my favorite ferns. It just kind of looks classically like a fern. Like if you want a fern that says that it's a fern, then this is the one, because it sure does just look like everybody's childhood drawing of a fern, The other nice thing about this fern is that it constantly throws up fresh foliage. So old tattered leaves kind of die away and new foliage comes on all the time. So it never looks tired like some ferns, once summertime comes on, can look a little burned up and done. But the lady fern always looks fresh. Carex fraseriana, the Fraser sedge. This used to be Chinophilus. It's been reclassified as Carex. Very unusual evergreen sedge with these weird sort of cotton swab flowers that come out of it in the spring. Very attractive, not really the easiest plant to cultivate. Not really the easiest plant to propagate either. Delphinium tricorn, spring larkspur, a great springtime plant. This is the purple flowered form. There's also a blue, a white, and sometimes you get a bicolor one. It's ephemeral, so it'll die away completely later on. Pretty adaptable to most woodland soils. Oh, there's a bicolor one right next to it. You can see it right here. It's got a purple backside and a white front side. Dicentra cucullaria, the Dutchman's breeches, another great spring ephemeral. These white flowers that look like pantaloons hanging from a clothesline. In bloom now, or maybe just finishing up even. A very interesting plant. It tends to propagate itself not just by seed, but by deliberately frost heaving its roots in the wintertime. The roots are these little pink bulbs, and they're just below the soil surface, and they don't really have roots in the wintertime. So when there's a frost period, they'll actually rise up to the surface of the ground and then tumble down the hill and then plant themselves downhill further, which is one of the ways they're able to form such big patches. Dirca palustris, the leatherwood. This is one that I've talked about before. A great woodland shrub. Not much to look at in flower, but kind of neat. And it is a summer fruiting shrub. It's one of the shrubs that will produce fruit in the summertime. Very valuable to birds. The other interesting thing about leatherwood is that you can take the branches and twist them up and tie them in a knot, and they won't break. They're extremely supple. Gentian, again, for deeper shade. This is the southern mountain gentian. Grows in very deep shade. The only place around here I've seen it is at Buffalo Mountain. Grows in the woods there. The flowers sometimes, but not always, open up all the way like that. They're more often more like this, just sort of kind of open. Geum fragarioides, the barren strawberry. Again, I'm going with the new name on this, the old Wadsteinia. Very similar looking to that invasive mock strawberry that gets all over people's yards. But this one has got bigger flowers, bigger foliage. Of course, it's native and is much less aggressive, although it does form a big ground cover. I would consider this a ground cover plant. Heuchera, well-known, popular plant, lots of foliage variation out there in the wild. This one is from a population I saw in Tennessee that had very dark red foliage. You can tolerate a great deal of shade too. Deer tend to like them though, unfortunately. One of the other popular heucheras, the hairy alum root, Heuchera villosa, have these great, huge, green, fuzzy leaves. There are also purple-leaved forms out there in the wild and in the nursery trade. Great ground cover plant. Looks great. Works in a pot really well too if you want to do a patio garden. Hydrastis canadensis, golden seal. A great little ground cover with these tiny little white flowers that give way to these huge raspberry-looking fruits in late summer and early autumn. And of course, this is the medicinal plant, so this is a plant that is often harvested over much, to the point where it's quite rare in some places. Canada waterleaf. I really like waterleaves. They're not much to look at in flower. They're just kind of boring little bluish white flowers that hang under the leaves. But in this time, in the springtime, the fresh foliage has got these watermarks all over it. And I just think that it's a great, neat looking ground cover. Closely related to bluebells, also it's in the same family. Spreads rapidly by root, so it'll form a big patch. I think it's a quite attractive plant and useful. Jeffersonia diphylla, blink and you miss the flower. The flowers look very similar to the bloodroot flower. The leaves expand out into what look like elephant's ears almost. This also grows at, I believe, Wildwood Park, or maybe I'm thinking of Falls Ridge. But a great flash in the pan spring wildflower. Spice bush, Lindera benzoin. This is a very common, well-known shrub. Works great as a garden plant, though, because it's a very early spring flower. You can make tea out of the whole plant. It makes a great cup of tea. And, of course, attracts the spice bush swallowtail butterfly. It's also dioecious. There are separate male and female plants. And I know at least one person who makes spice out of the dried and grated fruits in the fall. In fact, they want to start an orchard of these plants to manufacture spice on a larger scale. Canada Mayflower, Myanthemum canadense, a little more common up north, but I think it does occur here in some of the higher reaches of the mountains. It forms extensive ground covers, as you can see. This is a property in Connecticut that I was doing landscape work on many years ago. This was all overgrown by blackberry brambles, so you couldn't see any of it. And we completely cleared it of the brambles, and all of this Canada Mayflower was underneath it. Really, really nice ground cover. Myanthemum racemosum, the Solomon's plume. Again, they've reclassified it from Smilacina to Myanthemum. Fairly familiar plant around here. Has great white flowers that give way to a nice red to black fruit in the fall. Mehania, the Meehan's mint. This looks a lot like that weedy ground ivy that some people might have. And, you know, they're both in the mint family, and so there are some superficial similarities. But the leaves and the flowers are much larger on the native Meehan's mint. And it tends to grow in these dry, hilly woods. Here it is growing in a dry woods with that Iris verna. This is all Iris verna that's mixed in with it. Mertensia virginica, the Virginia bluebells, a plant that needs little introduction. I think we all know that plant pretty well. But a really great colonizing perennial. You take a couple of them and they spread by seed fairly rapidly, so you get a nice colony. Sometimes you get white ones mixed in, so here's a nice white patch. Occasionally there are pink ones as well. Great plant though. Mitella diphylla, the mitrewort. This is very similar to Tiarella, the foam flower. The leaves are similar, but the full flowers are a little more delicate. And if you were to zoom in and look at those flowers closely, they'd look like little snowflakes up and down the stem. So it's a great delicate plant for very dry, shady woods. Osmunda cinnamomea, the cinnamon fern. A great fern for deep shade and wet locations. If you want a ground cover, and just plant something you don't have to worry about, then cinnamon fern is a great choice because it's so big and fills in not much gets bigger than it is. So it is a great weed suppressor as well. Pachysandra procumbens, the Allegheny Pachysandra. This is our native Pachysandra. Not really native here. It's more Tennessee, Kentucky, but grows quite well here and is definitely a great alternative to Japanese Pachysandra, though it is by no means a great fast-spreading plant the way the Japanese Pachysandra is. So you need to buy a lot more of them if you want to make a ground cover out of it. Phlox divaricata, this is one of my favorite phloxes. It is so easy to grow, and it seeds itself around all over the place. You always get a lot of new seedlings here and there, different color forms and variation. Just all around a great naturalizing plant. The deer do tend to eat it a bit, but doesn't seem to care too much. If it does get eaten, it usually survives it quite well. Similar is the Phlox stolonifera, the creeping phlox. That's this plant right here. And that's a ground cover phlox. It sends out these long tendrils along the ground where it roots in and spreads. It's shorter than the wood phlox and tends to grow on more dry, hilly locations. Tends to be more of a bright pink in the wild. This color is actually a cultivar called Bruce's Purple. But there's also a white cultivar as well. But pink, almost a hot pink, tends to be the wild color. Podophyllum peltatum, the common humble mayapple. Great ground cover, great plant for naturalizing in an area. Turtles really like the fruit, box turtles. It's a great habitat plant and great for filling in some of those areas when the spring flowers are done blooming. Giant Solomon seal. Polygonatum commutatum. This is the Solomon seal to get up to 6 feet tall, sometimes more. Can take many, many, many years for them to mature to that size, though. I've also seen giant Solomon seal in full sun, so it can actually tolerate anything from full sun to deep shade. Christmas fern, Polysticum anchoristicoides, another well-known common fern, but it is evergreen and it's very useful as an evergreen ground cover and as a garden filling plant, space filler as well. Rubus odoratus, the purple flowering raspberry, great ground cover shrub. You know, it gets to be about waist high, 3 or 4 foot tall. Spreads rapidly and is thornless, so you don't have to worry about if you want to maintain it or control it. You don't have to worry about getting a handful of thorns when you're working with it. Sanguinary canadensis, another really familiar plant, great for naturalizing. You plant a couple of these and they'll seed around, and before you know it, you have more than you know what to do with. Very adaptable as well. I've seen them growing I've seen them in full sun on occasion. They do tend to get sunburned in full sun, but great plant though. Sculaire serrata, the showy skullcap. This is not always the easiest plant to get a hold of. This grows at Buffalo Mountain, and the seeds mature one at a time from the bottom to the top. So if I ever want to go collect seeds of this plant, I can only collect whichever one is right at the time. I can't just collect a whole bunch. So I'm never able to propagate a large amount of this plant, which is too bad because people really, really like it. You know, it's short. It's only about a foot, maybe a foot and a half tall. Has these great bicolored white and purple flowers. You can't tell from the photo, but the leaf has got a black margin all the way around the leaf. It's just a really, really great plant. Sedum tornatum, the woodland stonecrop. This is a common, well-known woodland wildflower. Grows in dry, mossy, rocky woods. Very adaptable, though. It can grow in full sun if you put it in like kind of a rock garden situation. It seeds around a good deal. I actually end up with seedlings of this plant coming up in all the pots in the nursery. Stylophrum diphyllum, the wood poppy. Here is a great huge colony at that property up in Yonkers in New York. We started out with just a few plants and it spread to fill this whole area. And between it and the bluebells, it just occupied this ravine in Yonkers. And before we got there and we were working on it, this was all Japanese knotweed and Japanese honeysuckle and just every, I mean, it's Yonkers. If you can think of an invasive plant, it was there. And so this was a place where we wanted plants that would actually colonize fast and furiously. And the Stylophrum will certainly do that. And it just prevented any kind of weed encroachment from returning. Great plant. Tiarella, familiar plant, lots of different forms and varieties of this available in the nursery trade. Variable leaf forms, sometimes you get patterns on the leaves. Flowers, there are even pink flowered forms of this plant. Some of them tend to be clumpy and others have runners. Very adaptable and showy. The deer do tend to eat it, so that limits its usefulness in some places. Trilliums, I'll throw a few trilliums in here, even though the deer love to chew on them, but there are lots and lots of species of trillium. I'm just going to highlight two, the common wake robin and the grandiflorum, the great white trillium. The most common trilliums around here. If you can keep the deer off, they'll actually naturalize and increase fairly readily. And before you know it, you'll have nice patches of them. I actually like the idea of planting a few and caging them. And after a couple of years, they've actually spread their seeds around and you can take the cages off, and there's so many of them that the deer usually aren't able to get all of them. Uvularia grandiflora, the greater marybells. There's lots of species of Uvularia. This is probably the showiest one. It's got these great yellow flowers that dangle down, kind of like yellow crepe paper. This is growing all over Buffalo Mountain. In fact, you can find every species of Uvularia at Buffalo Mountain. And I believe there are at least half a dozen species of Uvularia. Let's see. Getting down towards the end here. Viburnum serifolia. Again, I had to throw a couple of shrubs in here. One of my favorites, these great maple leaf viburnum. These bright white flowers followed by black fruit. The fall foliage color on this is like pink. So it's a great fall color as well. And violets. There's so many species of violets, and some people really dislike violets. I really like them though. They're great universal ground cover. They fill in all the gaps. They basically replace mulch in the garden. They're short, small, little plants that just fill in every little nook and cranny and keep the weeds from coming up. Canada violet is one of the nicest ones. They look like these great little daisies. Not daisies, pansies. They look like little woodland pansies. And then Viola pubescens, just as kind of an outlier, a yellow violet. We do actually have a pretty good number of yellow violets. Many of them have very special growing requirements, but the common downy yellow violet is actually fairly easy to grow, and is quite a nice one. And I believe that is all. So does anybody have any questions about some of the plants we talked about? Are we even able to do questions?
As far as I know, yes. Check to see if you muted yourselves or unmute yourselves if you want to ask a question.
You can also ask questions with chat.
Okay. Any questions?
I have a dry patch under a maple tree.
What kind of maple?
Sugar.
Excuse me. So the thing with maple trees is, one, it's a very heavy shade, and the roots tend to be very shallow. So it's very dark and dry. So you need plants that will tolerate the driest, darkest things possible. And so I would suggest that you look at plants like the woodland sedum, the sedum tornatum, Christmas ferns, wood fern, that mehania that I mentioned earlier, the mehan's mint, tiarella even, and heuchera will grow under those situations. One thing to remember about dry shade is that often there's nothing growing in those places. I mean, sometimes it's just too dry. And that's not necessarily unnatural. It's just that sometimes the tree dominates. And, you know, bare patches and openings in ground in the woods are not necessarily always a bad thing. Those kinds of places are where turtles will often dig to lay their eggs. And of course, there's a lot of native solitary bees, digger bees, and they will actually lay their eggs in those empty spots in the woods and in your garden. So, you know, if you're trying to maximize wildlife value and pollinator value, then I would remember to leave some open space also in your garden. Let's see, I think I saw a share here. What did I do? Whoops. There we go. Yeah, okay. Thanks, Pat. Anybody else? I thought I heard the sound of a text being sent. How do I get that to come back? All right.
You've got a few thank yous coming in over the chat.
Yes, I see that. Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent presentation. This was great.
I hope that there was some useful information there.
Do you want to let them know about your April 22nd plant sale?
I have, yes, that. Yeah, well, anyone who orders plants from me, I will deliver them into Christiansburg or Blacksburg on April 22nd. So between now and then, if you place your orders through my website, you can just, instead of a shipping option, you can choose in-store pickup. And then when it prompts you to add a note, just say, you know, delivery to Blacksburg. And if I get enough of them, and I'll make a trip into Blacksburg. You know, I've already got 2 to bring in. So if there are more, then that'd be great. And I'll definitely bring them on in to Blacksburg and Christiansburg. Even Roanoke, I'll take them up to Roanoke. I have at least 1 order in Roanoke already. So, yeah, just let me know, or just go ahead and place your order online.
Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And thank you everyone else who attended. And hopefully someday we'll be able to do this in person again. Hopefully at some point we'll be able to have people here at the nursery again more easily as well. Everyone is also welcome to come to the nursery with advance notice. And just beware, I'm only doing credit transactions here. And of course, wherever your protective gear, gloves, masks, etc. And I guess that's all, unless anyone has last thing. No? All right, well, thank you all.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Leah. It was great.
Take care, good night.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you. I see Susie Leslie.
I was hiding most of the time.
Hi,
I couldn't
Susie.
figure out why you couldn't choose everybody up there.
Huh, I don't know.
Because when I've done other ones like these, you can see like 15, 20 people at once.
Oh, I've only got like about half a dozen on the right-hand side, so.
Yeah. Yeah, you can play with it, and I was moving around, but I couldn't figure out how to see everybody.
Mm,
Although a lot of people had their video off.
yeah. Well, I just kept mine on because I hosted it, so.
I don't know how to cut it off.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Brenda. This was awesome.
Mhm. Good. And I'm gonna send out an email about the hopefully our fall plant sale on that. So
You had 21 people was the most I ever
yeah,
saw.
that's what I saw the most of.
Yeah, that was great. Okay, well, good night, everybody.
Okay. Night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks.
Okay.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Brenda.
Mhm.
Thanks, Brenda.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Brenda.
Okay. Mm-hmm.